Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Boots on the ground here in Morelia, Michoacan. Narco territory, as I like to say. The People's Reset, Derek Rose's People's Reset. With Dan Astin-Gregory of the Dan Astin-Gregory podcast. How you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
We met last year when I was doing my TNT radio broadcast. You were recording a podcast with Jason Christoph, who I just recorded a podcast with, and some people might not be familiar with you. I remember coming across you during the 2020s, during the COVID stuff. So I found your channel, was watching some of your stuff, and it's kind of cool to meet you in person here in Mexico, just randomly. So, if you could just getting your thoughts before getting your thoughts on what's going on in the world, if you want to just briefly tell us about how your podcast came about and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, well, I've been creating content since 2015, but then, my life just stopped when COVID came along, like right from the beginning, January 2020, none of it made sense. It took me a while to have the courage to use my content to speak into what was happening, but there was a defining moment in August 2020 when I saw the intensity of the restrictions on children. My wife and I were just planning on starting a family, and when I started seeing literally footage of children in Perspex boxes in China, that was enough is enough. I thought this thing has gone so crazy that I have to say something about it. I can't keep it in myself anymore. And I'd put some stuff online and got smacked about in the comments like most of us probably did early on. But I recorded a video and it just went viral. It went super viral. Like I could see the view count as I was speaking going up like I'd never seen before. And all the comments were saying, this guy is saying out loud what I've been thinking but too afraid to say. So I didn't think of starting a podcast at that point. I was just speaking my mind for 20 minutes. And it went crazy, reached over 1 million people by the end of the week. And I thought, no, this is validation that I need to use my voice to speak into this. And less than a month later, I launched the Pandemic Podcast. We did over 1,000 episodes, reached 25 million plus people, viewers all across the world. And yeah, I've changed trajectory now because we're not in the heat of the battle, if you will. But that was a defining moment in my life, and I'm so pleased to have played a role in shining a light on what was happening.
Yeah, one of my viral moments got nipped in the bud. I had been the first to interview in January 2020 the author of the Bioweapons Act legislation, Dr. Francis Boyle.
Wow,
that hit 300,000. And then they got deleted, and then they got re-uploaded, I think seen by millions on alternative platforms.
Yes.
And then the next day, my face was on the front page of Alex Jones's InfoWars.
Wow. And
he was doing a play-by-play of my interview with Francis Boyle. But so, as you say, you being at the Greater Reset, previously now People's Reset.
Yes.
That just tells us that, you've gone further along in terms of, what's going on. So maybe from your vantage point, in your mind, from your research and your work and being around different people and hearing different perspectives, for you, what in the world is going on?
Oh man, that's a big question. I don't even got time to answer that. Well, there's a cultural, political, and social trajectory that comes with multiple agendas that are unfolding somewhat simultaneously, predominantly first in the developed world. What's fascinating that I've learned over the last few years is there is a legacy freedom movement that has fought in the world in places that are captured by genuine dictators in authoritarian regimes, and there's an entire movement that precedes what happened in COVID to fight back against that type of territorial dictatorship. But we are facing what I describe as a cultural totalitarianism in a way. And sometimes it's very intense, like we saw during COVID. It's like an in-your-face tyranny that you can't avoid. But some of it is more subtle, like the introduction of digital IDs and the rollout of central bank digital currencies that are creeping impositions upon our freedoms, our liberties, our rights. But these are part of that wave of that trajectory that I outlined that encompasses multiple endpoints that threaten our freedoms and liberties. And that's where I've been paying most attention to now. And the reason I make that distinction between the kind of legacy freedom movement is because now I do believe we need a distinct freedom movement, which it has developed during COVID, but on the Western front, if you like, in the developed world, where we have a new set of impositions on freedoms, primarily using digital tools and technologies to erode our rights and freedoms, and then there's a cultural piece. We've seen the weakening of society, which I'm sure you talked to Jason about, the dumbing down of society. We've got this addiction to technology that means that people can now be influenced at scale with grand narratives. That there's a war on truth. We can't discern now what is real, and it's becoming amplified by deep fakes and AI and all these new again, technologically driven tools that can actually manipulate minds. So there's a whole scale of threats, particularly that I pay attention to, given my work with Free Humanity, is that is eroding what we know to be our freedoms and rights that have been hard won, that can be easily lost if we let our guard down.
You mentioned technocracy, and that's essentially been one of my biggest focuses, because I feel like that's the first assault now that's coming in. The walls are closing in. Way back in 2020, I cite him because I really, I enjoy some of my interviews have been groundbreaking in that sense. I interviewed the Jewish historian Edwin Black, who wrote about IBM and the Holocaust, how they created the first paper computers to classify everyone, and essentially we've been living a continuation of that. Now it's the digital version of what was being attempted. And it wasn't just the Germans, it was the Anglo-Americans that ideologically, materially backed the Nazi regime with the eugenics ideas, technology, and all that. Rockefeller, Carnegie's Black talks about that. And so he calls this the algorithm ghetto. I was just telling you before we hit record, a couple months back here in Mexico, I was denied renewing my debit card, because now they want the digital ID. Of
course.
And they want to link your digital ID to your bank account. And then soon, Europe, I was reading about UK, and I want to get your thoughts on Airstrip 1, right? UK, which is ground zero for many of these implementations. ULEZ, right? All this stuff. And Europe now is going to activate the entry-exit system, EES, and ETIAS, where you have to now ask for permission to come to Europe. Same is happening in UK. I just read that there were 90,000 less passengers to UK because of these now new requirements. And way back in 2021, I interviewed Todd Miller, who foretold this. He talked about the border industrial complex. He's an expert on borders.
Yeah.
And he said back on Geopolitics and Empire in 2021 that he went to all these events, expos on borders, and he says they're building a global, like a scaffolding.
Yes. For
every country, they're going to be bringing in these entry-exit systems. So you're going to ask for permission to leave your country, and then ask for permission to enter wherever you want to go. So just your further thoughts on this, and then what's going on in UK, because you got Keir Stalin, Adolf Farmer. I like to call Trilateral Commission, World Economic Forum.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot happening, and it's very interesting. I haven't heard that term, border industrial complex, but you can pretty much put the word industrial complex over a lot of all of this now, and commerce is largely driving it. There is a control element and a surveillance element at the state level that is becoming apparent. I mean, even it's not the same in the UK, but to travel to Spain now, apparently there's like 91 pieces of information that is required for you to enter certain parts of Spain. I mean, 91 pieces of information. That's insane. The sad reality for me, a lot of these things, is people go along to get along. It's people participate, they comply willingly. They don't think, what am I giving away here? And the mentality of I've got nothing to hide is not a good enough excuse, because that information can be used at any time in the future to deploy any amount of restrictions to your access, your enter. It's fine until they say, no, actually, you don't qualify on our 91-point questionnaire to enter our country. We saw during COVID that people would sacrifice so many principles just so they could go on holiday. And the same is now true again. So, yeah, it does concern me, this border industrial complex. I'll take that term home with me. And Derek Brose warned of this when he came to the UK. He said to the audience, this may be the last time we do it in the UK. For me personally, Dan may do it for us because he's here. But it may be difficult for me to come here. And he had all kinds of troubles getting into the country as it stood before any of these things are rolling out. So yeah, I'm really, really concerned about all those things. And I think we have to put strong resistance, which is why, as much as I'm inspired by events like this at the People's Reset, which is very much forward focused around building solutions, new systems, new structure, technological workarounds to some of these things. To me, with Free Humanity, we've got to continue the resistance work to hold a lot of this at bay. Keir Starmer, my goodness, where to start? I mean, it's less and less. I'm less and less inclined to enter into the political discussion, but you can't avoid it in the UK right now. It feels like he's at the tailwind of the old trajectory all the trajectory that I'm touching upon at the beginning. He's at the implementation front of a lot of the things we've talked about. But it feels like the winds of change are coming. There's a cultural shift. I think there is a rise of libertarianism again. I think there's a rise of a desire to be free once again and for less regulation, for less rules and restrictions. Yet this man is on one hand coming out publicly saying we need to strip back regulation, meanwhile implementing more and more rules and regulations. And he has been a disaster for our freedoms in the United Kingdom. And yeah, I am concerned about his continual reign as Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, but at the same time, it doesn't deter me from doing the work that we do in order to advance and embrace some of the principles we're here to talk about in Morelia.
There's been talk of Nigel Farage possibly coming back. Do you see that as a possibility?
Frankly, unless he assumes leadership at the Conservative Party, I think despite the ground they are building at reform, I don't think they'll have a popular vote. I think they'll struggle with that. He'll have a better chance than Andrew Tate with his Bruv party. But it paints a really bleak picture for the UK, actually. I think even though there is an alternative, I don't think it's a strong enough alternative to challenge the old guard. The duopoly will continue to reign. And I don't think the Conservative Party in its current setup has strength or might to challenge or provide even adequate opposition to the Labour Party right now. So we're in this mess where it's still a duopoly, really, but it's now a monopoly. You know, despite what the voter numbers showed, you know, in terms of actual numbers, they have carte blanche at the moment. Labour do, and there's very little strong opposition to actually resist some of the things they're bringing forward. So it's a tricky position at the moment in the UK, which why, for me personally, in the work that I do and what I'm inspired by here, is bringing it back to the grassroots and actually coming back to people-powered change and helping people to actually reconnect with their own personal principles and values, because the UK doesn't have a defined set of principles and values right now. You know, what does the UK stand for now? It's not the United Kingdom. It's not united in any way. And it's not great. It's not Great Britain. You know, so we're at this flux point as a nation where we don't really have a national identity. We don't really have a vision for the future that is compelling. And therefore we're in this state of flux. It's a strange place to be. So it's my hope from the grassroots we can actually start to energize. And there's some beautiful stuff happening on a local level that's not connected to any of this. You know, I'm part of some groups where I live in Bournemouth that are doing great things to try and regenerate the town in Bournemouth where I live and make it a great place to work and live again. And all of it is in defiance of the council. It's in defiance of local politics. It's really sending a middle finger up to all of these institutions saying, we're not going to rely on you. In fact, we're not going to abide by what you're doing. We're going to go and do something different at the grassroots. So there's some amazing things happening, but can it create enough change that politics becomes irrelevant? I don't think so. Not in the short term, maybe in the long term. But there's great hope that things are possible, implementing some of the things that we're learning here in Mexico and in the United Kingdom when we brought the People's Reset to Bath.
Before maybe going further on solutions, I've looked at some interesting stuff. There's been some talk of, we know that their end game is world government, world state.
Yep.
Particularly the British elites. According to some of my guests, like Richard Poe and others, it starts with the British, right? The Cecil Rhodeses and all the Fabians and all that, and that they've had plans. The EU for these supranational structures now, moving from national to supranational, regional, and then ultimately this, as H.G. Wells called it, this democratic socialist world state. And there's been some chatter that Starmer is trying to, deteriorate UK to then try and bring it back into the EU. You've had Clarence Strait, who wrote in the 1940s the Atlantic Union Project, which was interesting, where they wanted to integrate Britain with Canada and US. And it's kind of interesting considering the dynamic where we have now this talk in America of integrating Canada and U.S. into a North American Union, as Britain left EU and they're kind of hanging out there, it's like, hey, I wouldn't be surprised if in the coming months or years you hear this idea, hey, we should integrate, Britain with Canada, USA, because these go back to these age-old plans. And so, before just going further on solutions, do you see any, besides the technocracy, or do you see any other problems or threats?
Well, I think the technocracy, that is a global threat, and the centralization that comes with that. I think there's this global rise of global centralized government or governance. They're very careful to use the terms governance over government, but there is obviously the World Government Summit. It does what it says on the tin.
World Economic Forum. Right?
Yeah, World Economic Forum. So these things are very clear.
There's issues like migration and World War III and whatever.
Yeah, these are big issues on the table for me. The rise of global conflict at the minute is concerning. I want to touch upon Canada and America. It's going to be very interesting to see what follows Trudeau in Canada. The initial response from Canada to Trump's potential tariff on goods imported from Canada was very interesting. Trudeau basically saying nothing's off the table, which is a very strong empty threat, I think. But I don't know who will follow Trudeau and what the regime will look like there. I think that will determine whether there is a power block that arises between the US and Canada. But I think preceding a global government structure, I think we will see the emergence, as all well predicted, of multi-power, these multipolar world, these different blocks emerging. We're seeing BRICS, the BRICS nations emerging, and these are indicators that the power structure is potentially shifting away from a US dominance, although I think Trump may seek to advance that in a different way. But it's going to be very interesting to see these multipolarities play out. And if they do so peacefully, I look back at kind of big grand cycles, and I would suggest that we will see an escalation of conflict, whether that will take the form of actual war like we're seeing in Ukraine and Russia, Israel, Palestine, or whether it will take a different form of conflict. But it's going to be a very turbulent period, I think, in the next 5 years. Very turbulent. Political shifts we're seeing happening. I worry about it. I do worry about it.
I've got some English listeners, and I heard the story of one who was pretty wily during COVID. He was a businessman, and I think he defied a lot of some of the mandates and continued to do what he was doing. And so, further thoughts on what individuals spread across the world can do. For me comes to mind, just don't comply.
Yeah.
Trying to become resilient so they can't shake that carrot or stick at you. So, having like a farm or something where you have at least water. If you're living in an urban area and you get debanked and we're all cashless and they shut off your water, electricity, well, I'm going to go to the farm and I got a well. Your further thoughts on solutions?
Yeah, when you come to a place like Mexico and you hear about some of these amazing eco-villages and communities that are emerging in all these amazing places and these wonderful, beautiful lands, you can see the possibility in a place like this. But there is a cultural appetite for those types of communities. It's more in tune with the ancestry of the lands here. Whereas in Britain, I think there is some appetite for those types of setups. But I think people are more connected to their kind of urban dwellings. And I think we need to think differently in the UK. There's a friend of mine who's working on some amazing equivalents, I think, but in a very more modern, domesticated kind of way, buying large portions of land and building probably what you'd see a traditional land developer turn into a housing community, but building other different functionality within it. So, the health aspect, the connectivity, and actually building on some of the principles we hear about here at the People's Reset. But I think ultimately what I'm concerned about is actually the dumbing down of society and how we repair that. Those who have become quote unquote awake to the world that we're in right now, they're aware of technocracy, they're aware of the global centralization, they're aware of the threats of global government, global governance, they're aware of the threat of digital ID, central bank digital currencies. I think for those people, it's now stepping away from awareness is the first step of change in any endeavor, but now it becomes about what do you do with that awareness at an individual level. So firstly, have you got your own health in order? Are you in a position where you can hand on heart say that you are not a risk of being subjected to the pharmaceutical industrial complex? Do you have an adequate plan for your own well-being that can enhance your well-being so you do not become a risk where you have to be imposed, where you have these things imposed upon you? Are you aware of the alternatives in your local area? Are you aware of the biodentistry? Are you aware of the different healthcare options outside of the traditional system? If you're not, that's your first checklist. It's take care of your own health and understand what alternatives are available on a local level. Similarly, financially, if you're not in a strong financial position, and Jason and I had a wonderful conversation about this today, about how the world is programming you to be poor. How do you reverse that programming, and how do you actually take care of your financials, not only for now but for the future and for your family? Because having strong financial independence is going to be essential at this point, and understanding how to navigate your assets in a way that will prevent you getting swallowed up by the CBDCs, because it's going to be a very rapid transition. It will happen the wholesale banks will do it first, which is distinct from retail bank, like, consumer level for individuals like you and I. But by the end of 2030, I wouldn't be surprised to see the majority of Europe using central bank digital currencies. And if people aren't aware of alternatives in the decentralized space through blockchain and crypto, at the very minimum, or more physical alternatives, there's a rise now of physical British pound alternatives in the UK. They have their own problems. But if you're not aware of those alternatives, now's the time to get educated. And similarly, education structures, at the moment, I'm very concerned as a parent of a 3-year-old about the possibility of putting my son into the state education system. But I'm full on of my work. I travel the world like this. My wife is self-employed. She has her own business. There's no way we have the physical time and attention to, as important as it is to homeschool my son. So we have to find alternatives in our local area. And if they don't exist, then we have to help create them. So I think for those who have awareness now, it's time. Don't wait. It's easy. I invest in the crypto markets, and a lot of people, they will contact me for advice the moment the thing starts to take off. Don't wait.
Tell me about it.
Don't wait for that moment. And it's the same with education or your health. Don't wait until your health gets so bad it's too late. So we have to get proactive now. And then beyond the people who are even aware of these things, I think we have to find different ways to educate people about the values of resilience and hard work ethic. I think we've become so dumbed down that people have become lazy. And I think we need to bring a bit of that impetus back, to bring back this sense of personal independence, willing to, to carve and forge your own path, being someone who's willing to blaze a trail. Where are the role models now? So many, and Jason and I talked about this today in the media space. For men, where are the strong males that are balanced? Because there's some imbalanced strong males out there as role models, I would say.
You already mentioned one of them.
Yes. Where are the balanced role models? Where are the healthy role models for men and women in this age that show courage and conviction, but also humility and love and kindness and compassion? Where are those people at scale? So I think we have to lead the change we want to see, and that's my personal mission. And it's my hope that others, when they connect to content like this and conversations like this, they not only see what's happening, but decide to do something about it for themselves, and if they can, for their community.
Yeah, as you said, going back a couple of years, I'm guessing you're familiar with Brad Skistimas, 5 Times August.
Yes, he's got one of these shirts. He's a dear friend.
Yeah, and so I've had him on a podcast, and then I got to hang out with him in the last 2 years at different events, and I was telling him he's the Bob Dylan of our age. And so these heroes are no longer materializing, and we have the opportunity in our categories. I was a professor and moonlighting as a podcaster for a decade, and now I'm podcasting, and 5 Times August musician, and his music is excellent.
Yes.
And lately, I just can't bring myself to listen to some of the legacy music anymore. They sold out, and his music is great, and I just put it on. He's now our new musical hero.
Absolutely.
This person is our entrepreneurial hero.
Yeah. So Peter Conway in the UK is a great guitarist. He's our Dylan equivalent over in the UK.
I think Van Morrison stood up, or Clapton woke up, right, and so many others. And I was just going to mention with the technocracy stuff. I mean, this stuff is coming fast too, because I went to Paris for the first time, I think 2019, and I was living in Kazakhstan. And so I went to the Kazakh bank and I said, give me some euros. And they just gave me 500 euro bills. And we go to Paris, we have lunch, and they refuse to accept the 500 euro bill. And I'm just like, I was in shock. I'm like, I can't, like, you're not taking cash. And, slowly, again, the walls are closing in. I guess one of my final questions, how do you see the space? I think you guys have been talking about it this week. The alternative media, independent media, podcasting space. I feel in many ways it's been a lifeline. I mean, not just for myself as a content producer, but also I consume a lot. Yeah. And I think for other people, the information that we've gained has, I think, saved many people's lives. There's a lot of stuff going on in alt media, infiltration by the security state, by the globalists, grift and so forth. Just any thoughts on where we are in that space right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's undoubtable that there are independent media outlets that are emerging that are funded and operated by the very institutions that we're rallying against. I wouldn't be able to personally identify any of those right now, and nor is it my focus. But I think we, again, have to lead the change we want to see. We can quite clearly see the problems of the legacy media, but I am also concerned about some of those trends now flowing into the alternative media space, specifically with the kind of algorithms that we're facing. It's a race to the bottom to who can create the most sensationalized, hyperbolic version of the story in order to get attention. And that works because of probably everything you talked about, Jason, the way our psyche works, the way our brain works. Advertisers have learned how to get people's attention, and, heightened emotions is one way to do that. If you can get people into a cortisol state, fight or flight, they're going to pay attention. And that's a sad reality that I'm seeing emerging in the alternative media space. And it's almost like now a race to see who can get the most alarmist content, the most sensationalist headlines, the most crazy thumbnails. But everyone is doing it to survive because they have to, and that's the way that the world is operating. But I think many of us are now looking at it and going, none of us want to do that. Our audience don't want to be sold to like that because it's a sales process. We're trying to sell them a story. Ultimately, even if there's no money in exchange, which is a transaction of attention. So I think what I would like to see, I would like to help pioneer, is reasonable sense making that leaves people feeling a sense of calm afterwards. And not because they're not alarmed by what they're hearing, they can still feel a sense of injustice, but they actually come out of it thinking, you know what, I feel educated now, I feel informed, I feel empowered as a result of what I've heard, but I also feel a sense of hope, because I think that's lacking right now, is that sense of optimism for the future, because I actually think all of that sensationalism is part of the problem, and it's part of the dumbing down. It's putting us all in this fight or flight state. And what I know about human behavior is that if we're in that cortisol state, then we can't be our best creative self. So we've got to snap out of that. So without creating a situation where people just start tuning out because they can't handle it anymore, how do we create content that keeps people engaged, informed, empowered, whilst giving them the tools to actually use that information for good?
Viewers and listeners know that we here at Geopolitics and Empire remain calm and collected.
It's your character, right? You embody that. That's beautiful.
Right. And it's just as you say, there's been a lot of grift. I've seen other podcasters where every podcast is a world-ending emergency. I'm like, no, it's not. Come on, let's.
It's breaking news. It's not breaking news. It's like last week. It's like old news. You can't put like alarm bells and breaking news on everything. Yeah. What's breaking anymore?
But well, all right. Any final thought for us? I think we've covered a lot. I like to try to get my guests to synthesize a lot in a short amount of time. So, any other thought or final thought for us?
Well, to close out the media piece, I think there's a lot of space now for continued citizen journalism, and I think up-leveling the standards. I think we've got to look at standards on that and like professionalizing. I think that's an evolutionary journey that we're going on, and people like yourself have been pioneers in that. But for people at home, kind of just paying attention to what's happening in the world, keep your eyes open. but keep your focus on your own personal mission. You know what you're here to do. My mission here in Mexico this year is to help people to connect with that driving force within them, because I think the more activated people, going from becoming aware to activated, that we have, I think we really create change, because you have to remember that culture is downstream from politics, and we have seen, I think, the politics has reflected the culture that that has culminated since this slide over the 1950s to 60s and to where we are today. A lot of the ideologies that we're dealing with today are coming to a peak, and it's time that we come up with new ideas and new visions for the future, and it's down to us to do that. You know, so if people are waiting for someone to stand up and lead, or wait for a politician to come and change things, well, keep waiting. Sure, you know, you might get a politician that does certain things that you agree with. They may be antagonistic to the old. Fine. But they're not going to be perfect. There is no demigod that's going to come and change the game for you. So if you want things to change, then you have to change. And that is my closing message to people at home. You know, figure out how you can play a role in becoming the change you want to see. And
I'll just add to that, just like you said, everyone, wherever they are, find your skill. Don't become a podcaster. You know, I just fell into it. I was an educator, professor, teacher. And so this was sort of a natural evolution of that. And like I said, it was a hobby. And this is where I am. And this is what I'm doing. I'm podcasting. And you know, people out there, you know, homeschooling, building a family, taking care of a family, business, you know, Jason Christoph, becoming an entrepreneur. If you have capital, then you can use it to support people or initiatives that need it. And so on and so forth. So everyone should find their skill, develop it, get capital, become independent, and then start uplifting others. Your links are in the podcast description, but if you want to tell us the best places where people can find you and projects and
all of the links and my projects on danastingregory.com. So, and if you want to find me on social media, just type in Dan Astin-Gregory, and it's Dan Astin-Gregory. People keep saying Dan Austin-Gregory. I don't know where the Austin comes from. It's ASTINGREGORY. So I appreciate you putting it in the comments.
All right, I think of Austin Powers. No.
Oh, man.
Just, well, thanks for bringing on the podcast, Geopolitics Empire.
Appreciate that, brother. Good to see you.